All right, man, peace. So, brothers, I guess you can call this the first, but really it's the second entry into a sentiment that I first broached in one of my responding to your comments videos on YouTube. That being the concept of why is the so-called black man scared to lead and scared of his woman? So I'll call this volume 1 for the sake of originality purposes, because the original video was not really an actual video. It was more of a responding to your comments video added into that series. But this entry, this initial edition of this new series is going to be featuring Mr. Killer Mike, the rapper from Atlanta, Georgia, who's a very intelligent brother. He just has worldly intelligence. He does not have spiritual intelligence. And in my view, that is why the so-called black man is scared to lead, because the intellect and the wisdom that so many cats have is not based in the fourth dimension. It's not under the inspiration and the direction of the Most High. It's under the inspiration and the direction of their own carnal mind, which always predicates that they put the woman on a pedestal. And that's part of the reason why the so-called black man is in such a low estate today. He worships his woman, therefore he's scared of his woman. Whatever you worship, you have great fear of. You have godly fear of. And the woman knows that. Even though she clamors for quote-unquote real men, she also loves the attention that she receives by being put on a pedestal. So-called Father's Day, or the Day of Tammuz, just passed. And all we see are so-called women, especially black women, running around talking about how they're the father and the mother. Why is that? Because they attention monger. They constantly seek to worship themselves and to reinforce their worship amongst others. It's the epitome of narcissism. When you listen to Killer Mike speak, you can tell that he should have leadership capabilities, but he has no true confidence in himself. Why is that? Because he's been programmed not to seek contention with the number one inhibitor in the so-called black community, that being the liberal black female. He's been trained to always be subservient to the concept of black female rulership. And you see that in the city of Atlanta with their female mayor, Keisha Bottoms. Unbelievable they have a mayor named Keisha Bottoms. But anyway, the point being is this. In my view, Killer Mike is clearly more intelligent than her, but he does not have the confidence to step up and enter into the political sphere, where I think he could probably make a difference if he chose to do so. So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
So I'm duty bound to be here to simply say that it is your duty not to burn your own house down for anger with an enemy.
Let me say this. This here is the type of speech that so many woke Negroes have always begged for Michael Jordan to make. They want Michael Jordan to stand behind a podium and beg low-level thinking so-called Negroes to not kill each other over his sneakers. And I've always appreciated Michael Jordan for not allowing himself to be suckered into a speech like that, at least thus far in his life and in his career. Because I believe that he understands that a speech like that is beneath him to make. If I have to stand on television and tell human beings that they should not be killing one another over my sneakers, then what does it say about the savage state of the people who are deciding that they want to wear my shoes, particularly within the so-called black community? It must mean that a lot of them are beyond repair. And that's the thing. In order for us to fix our problems, it starts household upon household, individually. Michael Jordan cannot save us. Killer Mike cannot save us. But when it comes to this video, I would rather see Killer Mike making statements to exhort the people to a higher level of conduct than Keisha Bottoms, who is not a leader. None of these women are leaders. And in times of adversity, they're going to show you that they're not real leaders. They're going to panic. Because the style of leadership that all women portray is always going to be trying to act as if they're your mother. They're not going to think of plan B, plan C, plan D. That's not in their nature. That's not how they operate.
It is your duty to fortify your own house so that you may be a house of refuge in times of organization. And now is the time to plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize.
I think that Killer Mike stole part of that speech from Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, whichever one that was. I think it was the fourth entry that came out in 1973, where the ape Caesar, he stands on top of the burning car or top of the steps, and he says, from now on, we're going to be the ones that plot and plan and scheme and strategize and things of that nature. Caesar, by the way, is inspired by Moses from the Bible, and I mentioned that in other videos. I'll be covering the Planet of the Apes series down the line. But I think that Killer Mike might have stole a little bit of his speech from that movie.
I love and I respect you. I hate I don't have more to say.
I hate that you don't have more to say either, because it's very clear that you have a higher potential to lead your people than Keisha Lance Bottoms does. But let's be for real, brother. One of the reasons why you don't have more to say and you're unwilling to try to lead is because you probably have issues with your discipline, whether it be with food, drugs, and or alcohol. No disrespect. And of course, what I'm saying is alleged. On top of that, he's a super liberal Negro. I had a cat come into my comment section saying that he liked Killer Mike until he heard Killer Mike speak at his school, and I believe that he said Killer Mike was speaking about how he was in approval of the LGBTQ and homosexuals and lesbians and things of that nature. So once again, this is why our communities all across, not just the United States, but all across the world, are rife with confusion. We've embraced Luciferian principles that have harmed our people. They've hurt us to a great degree.
I can't fix it in a snap. I hate Atlanta's not perfect for as good as we are. But we have to be better than this moment. We have to be better than burning down our own homes. Because if we lose Atlanta, what else we got?
That, of course, is Killer Mike. Killer Mike joins us right now on the program. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you guys, man.
Killer Mike, I appreciate you not only as an artist, but as an activist. You've been an intellect. Your sacrifices and your discipline for our culture have been so very needed.
Right, but what culture is that? In the hip-hop world, they love using that term, the culture. What culture are you talking about? Air Jordan sneakers, cornrows, big fat rope chains, baggy jeans, Adidas. What are you talking about? The culture. Like, stop that. There's no real culture. Hip-hop is not a culture. Hip-hop is a manifestation of the so-called black man's creativity. That's all it is.
And I'm grateful for you. And also, Atlanta's mayor, she gonna be the first black president.
Here goes Jalen Rose being a simp again. In order for Jalen Rose to be married to Molly Karam, he has to be a simp, because we've heard how she speaks on First Take. So in order for them to agree that they were going to come together as a couple and memorialize it in the form of a ceremony and sign a contract, he has to be a big simp. And as I've been telling you, brothers, there's this big push by these low-level black males to constantly try to promote the black female as a leader and as a political force. And it's really just the black man once again trying to shirk his responsibilities as the leader that he's supposed to be. Put down the weed, put down the alcohol, and get your mind right.
I love her so much. How do you feel? Absolutely. How do you feel the protests have progressed since you did that speech?
How the protests have progressed is that they've gone from being 90% non-black to being 89% non-black.
Well, I mean, the protest period should always be progressing. We should never get comfortable that our liberties exist.
In other words, you have no real answer. Jalen Rose asks him, how have the protests progressed? And he responds back with, well, the protests should always progress. That's some Jesse Jackson slick talk right there.
Without protest, Atlanta is the city it is because of people like John Wesley Dobbs, who was an unofficial black mayor of Atlanta, and after riots in Atlanta, made sure that deals were brokered, that blacks could have a section and grow an economy like the Auburn Edgewood Avenue. So I'm not against protests at all, and actually encourage us to always push government to be better. I think Atlanta handles protests well. I think that the policemen that attacked 2 kids that were going home, they've been fired and are going to be charged. I think that was what a mayor should do. This is not the first time. Atlanta had been doing that before. I think that our mayor spoke from a place of a concerned black mother from the West Side. She's from the same neighborhood as T.I. and I.
Right, but that's part of the problem. We don't need concerned black mothers. We need dudes that have real plans and end games. The woman by nature is not going to have a plan or an end game. Her style of leadership is always going to be a quote-unquote concerned black mother. So-called black women have been playing the role of the concerned mother for 40, 50 years. And all it's done is enable these young so-called black boys to go from the household to a corrupt school system to the penitentiary system. So it's not working. We need a real plan.
I heard her backstage telling them to hold police or anyone going in because she wanted an opportunity to try to get people to go home. And that's a concerned black woman. That's bigger, badder than a politician. That's your mother and your auntie.
Once again, more mother equals God programming. These are the things that are holding the so-called black man back, that mama's boy mentality. And these guys have this shit reinforced within them from their youth. And it's not working. This is why the so-called black man gets no respect across the world. And he makes a mockery of himself all the time, trying to keep his mother on a pedestal. Women are wonderful. Mothers are beautiful. All that is great. But even in the animal kingdom, when the young lion's mane starts to sprout, he must leave the pride. He cannot be up under his mother for his entire life. That's not how it works.
Appreciated her in that moment, letting the veneer of politician down and simply being, an angry black woman that didn't want to see people get hurt.
Well, the problem is that most angry black women do want to see people get hurt. As a matter of fact, as any real lawyer will tell you, 80 to 85% of all men are locked up over a woman. And that's why I've mentioned in many of these other videos, these dudes are always talking about Karens, these angry white women. Let's talk about the Keishas. Because a lot of you niggas are locked up over an angry black woman who's upset with you over child support, or over the fact that you've moved on to someone else, or over the fact that she went through your phone and saw a phone number that she didn't like, and things of that nature. So let's start with the overglorification. Let's address the facts from every angle. And of course, we're going to end up stepping on some toes, but that's the only way that real changes are going to be made. Trolling the police and trolling the so-called white man, that's momentary satisfaction. That's like going to McDonald's and getting a hamburger. Yes, it might quiet your stomach, but there's nothing nutritious going in. Nothing long-lasting.
I respect her, and I actually think she definitely is going to be on the national political stage.
Well, that's what she's aiming for. She's trying to put her name into the hat, or keep her name in the running for possibly being Joe Biden's VP.
And all the talk about black women VPs, I think she's as fit as any other candidate.
The Democratic Party is so done. Like, they are so fucking finished. Barack Obama, he really did usher in the end of the Democratic Party. Now it's just... it's like just a super liberal fucking cesspool. It's pathetic, man.
Well, this fight for inequality has touched all corners of our society, including sports. And one of the coaches of the Broncos, Vic Fangio, was asked about the elements of racism in the NFL, and here's what he had to say.
I don't see racism at all in the NFL. I don't see discrimination in the NFL.
Well, here's the issue, Vic. It's not really for you to see. Someone asking an older Caucasian man if he sees racism somewhere, that's like asking a young so-called black boy or young so-called black girl, do they see anti-Semitism somewhere? They wouldn't even know how to look for it because they're not the targets of it.
We live in a great atmosphere, like I alluded to.
Yes, for you, where you can have no talent in the game of football, and yet you can preside over a group of young so-called black men, and rest assured that even if you get fired, your same name will be thrown back into the hat for consideration to coach somewhere else. Most so-called black men, they get one opportunity to be a head coach in the NFL, and then they might possibly be hired as a coordinator somewhere else. But how many so-called black men get multiple opportunities to be a head coach in various places unless they've gotten to a Super Bowl somewhere? Like, in order for the dude Jim Caldwell or Lovie Smith or any of these guys to get opportunities to coach somewhere else, they had to have taken their team to a damn Super Bowl.
Earlier, we're lucky. We all live together, joined as one for one common goal.
For the team to win and for you to keep your job, right?
And we all intermingle and mix tremendously.
Bullshit. There's separation in every locker room. And it's normally according to race.
You know, if society reflected an NFL team, we'd all be great.
If society reflected an NFL team, everyone would be much better paid, but everyone would be much more drugged up.
Obviously, his name is Vic Fangio. What do you think about his comments?
Delusional, but he's a good company man.
I think, well, I just like to say I've known many people that have played in the NFL, including my best friend from kindergarten, Robert Hicks, who was a Buffalo Bill, Stanley Pritchard, whose mother taught us, who was a former Dolphin. I'd like to say that, you know, I've heard more times than not from NFL players, and not in particular those two, but just you're in rooms, you hearing, they refer to the NFL as a plantation. So,
it is a lot like a plantation, but I will compare it more to the old gladiatorial style from ancient Rome. They train very much like how the ancient gladiators trained, and even how they're adorned with the helmets and the shoulder pads is very much akin to the gladiatorial combat arenas of ancient Rome.
I'd like to challenge Mr. Fangio to have some open and honest dialogue with players that don't look like him about what it really feels like to wear that helmet.
The gladiatorial training schools, they had training camps and things like that, very much like the modern NFL players do.
To know that there's certain things you can't say because your owner may not agree or hold a political thought. And I'd also like to give him the challenge of going on YouTube and looking at 1 hour of Jane Elliott and her blue and brown eye experiment.
Jane Elliott has become the favorite of the wokeities. She basically is an almost 90-year-old Caucasian female who created a study in which she approximated the effect that racism has on so-called black people by replacing them with the blue-eyed Caucasian children in her class, where she would have the brown-eyed Caucasian children in the class, who normally were the majority, be treated in an entitled or an exemplary way. And the blue-eyed kids, they would be diminished. They would be talked down to. They would be scolded far harsher. They would have less recess time. And even though the experiment only lasted a week, she noted that there were some psychological effects on the children that she ran this program on. And then she would reverse it and make the blue-eyed children the adorned ones, the ones who were the favorites. And the brown-eyed ones would be the diminished demographic. But what she noticed is that even though she had them switch roles, the blue-eyed children, they were more compassionate to the brown-eyed children because of what they were forced to endure during the first week. I believe that in her study, she even found that the test scores of the blue-eyed children started to diminish after only a few days of being treated less than. They had more communication issues, lower self-confidence, things of that nature. So she was able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that once you develop a caste system in a society, it does psychologically and intellectually affect the cognitive function of that diminished caste.
Because a lot of times white people think everything is okay because they're ignorant and don't know better. And I don't mean ignorant as a derogatory term. In our ignorance, we may not know how things are being skewed. But once you know, you can't unsee. So I'd like to give Coach that homework. He should take a page out of the Jane Elliott playbook and try to get more depth.
And of course, Jane Elliott, she uses a lot of race mongering so that she can hide one of her true ideologies, which is the promotion of the LGBTQ.
Knowledge on that, and I challenge him to talk to some of his players in private, alone, about what it really feels like to be a black player in a league where the coaches do not represent you in terms of what you look like. Many of the coordinators do not, and definitely the ownership does not.
Well, I'll have to wonder about how much exactly that affects many of the brothers in the NFL, especially in light of the fact that many of them are being raised in households without a black male authority figure. I actually think that many of them might have an even greater problem with a black male head coach than they would a white male head coach, because they're accustomed to being raised in an environment where their own mother will normally show more respect to the Caucasian man and the image of Caucasian male authority than they will black male authority. And that trickles down to the children, and it shows in how receptive many so-called black players are to instruction or harsh reprimand from a so-called black coach as opposed to a so-called white coach, where they're far more receptive to receive the correction from the so-called Caucasian coach than they will the so-called black coach.
that is a very, very, very big building to look at and say that racism does not exist here. Racism exists in every corner of this country, Mrs. Fangio, and I challenge you to find it within your own square and within your own self and to rid ourselves of it finally, including you.
Especially a gentleman that was in the league during Colin Kaepernick's silent protest during the national anthem that ultimately led for him being blackballed out of the league. So, ironically, his former team, the San Francisco 49ers, they participated in the blackout yesterday, Killer Mike, and they want to...
Once again, that is why you should not trust this so-called woke black renaissance that so many of these major corporations seem to be on board with. It very clearly is a marketing strategy.
For Black Lives Matter.
And a political strategy as well.
Right now and everything. How do you feel about people who are, I consider, late to the party, but now feel like they want to join?
Well, you're not talking about people, you're talking about organizations. An organization,
right, corporations, really,
is going to do what's best in the times in terms of marketing standpoint, not to be damaged by the times. So those organizations, but we don't know if the individual people that were involved in the firing and blackballing of Colin have a change of heart, and I would assume they do not. The question becomes, as a society, when are we going to become disciplined and supportive enough of those that are willing to fight for our freedom?
No, the question is, as a quote-unquote community, when are we going to become supportive of one another? Because until that happens, you can talk about the police all you want. We're still going to be at the bottom of every stat of importance and at the top of every stat that is important in a bad or malicious or insidious way. We have to focus on ourselves. A lot of these topics are just red herrings.
Even if we don't agree with it, to protest, because this is not the first time it happened. His name was Chris Jackson at the time. But we had a player that, when I looked at the Michigan Fab Five, and I looked at Chris when he played for the Nuggets. Definitely, I think it's Moad now.
Mahmoud Abdul Rauf is the name that the brother changed his name to, formerly Chris Jackson, who used to light people up in college. I remember watching him at LSU with Shaq when I was a little boy. And he got to the NBA, and he was a dude who can get super hot. He was one of many small guards that played in the NBA in the 90s that normally average around 16, 17 points per game because of the style of play at that time. But if they got hot, they could score 50. He was one. Dana Barros was another.
Muhammad now. But we protested as kids, and we got in trouble. So we didn't get blackballed from high school, though. We were allowed to come back. So I just want to say, if you really want to...
Because you were not affecting the money of the high school. Hello? People are going to find out once again, should the NFL season be allowed to start? What Marxism does is it cuts into your bottom line drastically. That's all it does. And it's worked nowhere. It's never worked anywhere. Marxism/communism has never worked anywhere. But people continue to try to force its implementation.
For Colin Kaepernick, take the blackball off. It's time to really do the work for real as individuals and stop as organizations just trying to save our bread. We know that there are issues with the NFL and athletes that are outspoken, regardless of what they're outspoken about. And I believe Skip Bayless, honestly, said the most incredible thing in the midst of it all. He said, I hope the players understand that whether they agree with Colin Kaepernick or not, if they all stand in solidarity with his right to do it, it will finally break some of the bargaining leverage that the league has over them. And of course, players of other races and of other political philosophies chose not to, and now you still have a league in which the ownership dominates players to some degree with people who are compared to indentured servitude.
I mean, with the environment in our society being the way it is now, and as we head into the NFL season, it's obviously you think that perhaps we'll have sort of resurgence of people kneeling for the anthem. And when asked about that, Drew Brees, the quarterback of the Saints, said, I will never agree with anybody disrespecting the flag. What do you think about those comments?
I would like to know what he considers disrespect, because
he's already made it clear what he considers disrespect. Someone, quote unquote, protesting during the national anthem, not standing at attention with their hand over their heart, done whatever it is that he believes in. And he has the right to that. What he does not have the right to do is tell someone that they don't have the right to protest. He could say he doesn't agree with it. but he cannot stop someone from doing it. That's the difference.
And when I travel and we perform in Germany, I never see a Nazi flag. I don't see streets named for Nazis, because Nazis are a part of history that Germany understands was a cancer and corrupt, and they've ridded themselves of. Drew Brees plays in the Deep South. As we travel through the South, we see the Confederate flag everywhere that bounds. That is a treacherous flag.
I agree. It's a treasonous flag. I've even made videos about it, old videos from 2 or 3 years ago on my YouTube channel, about how the Confederate flag is a mark of treason against the United States. And that's the reason why it should be torn down, and there should be no Confederate monuments in the United States. But that's a red herring. That has nothing to do with Drew Brees' statements. I'm pretty sure that Drew Brees does not hold his hand over his heart as the Confederate flag waves or the Confederate anthem is playing. So you're really trying to answer a question with a red herring.
Flag that if you read the cornerstone speech by Alexander Stevenson, he says in the cornerstone speech of the Confederacy that our Constitution is built on the natural order, that white society and white man is above black people, and they are to be held in servitude and bondage. So
yes, and what the 13th Amendment did was put everybody in bondage. Now we're all debt slaves.
You're going to tell me about flag and disrespecting the American flag, the fact that you live in a region that they still find a rebel flag or the Confederate flag, and you don't adamantly speak against that on a regular basis, just tells me that you're protecting the way of life or what you think is right. The American flag stands for the First Amendment and the ability to say what you feel about situations. Now, you bear the brunt of that. You may get blackballed out of the NFL, but you have the right to. So if you support and you don't want to see the American flag disrespected, don't look at it on Budweiser shorts at picnics. Don't look at it on bikini shots in Playboy. Don't look at it on your favorite album covers because you think that rock band is rocking for you. Be all the way with it. You're an intelligent football player.
That's a better point. The Confederate flag point, that was an attempt at misdirection.
But that was an incredibly stupid thing to say. And to live in a country where you have the rebel flag, and again, that's not something I even harp about. I live in a place of Stone
You spent the last 2 minutes harping about it, brother. Just stop.
Mountain, the biggest Confederate memorial there is. I'd like to see that those faces chipped off that mountain one day. I'm adamantly against that flag, even though I have bigger political fights to fight. But I'm not going to.
You should have bigger political fights to fight. You should be trying to gear up to lead your people in some way, but unfortunately you're too woke to do so. So you have to give away all your power. You must divest all of it to some incompetent woman who's just looking for attention.
He's so burdened with the.
And then no disrespect. Once again, I always say this. The woman is wonderful, but she should not be trying to lead a mass of people. Like, just stop, please.
Religion that has become Americanism, nationalism, that I forget that the flag represents the United States Constitution. And the United States Constitution was written by a bunch of people who chose to protest violently.
Right, they chose to revolt. They were not looking for equality with Britain. They were looking for independence. So once again, you're making a different point, but now you're starting to get to the crux of the matter. So-called black people are scared of being independent. Those quote-unquote founding fathers, they were not scared of being independent. So when you bring them up, it really only shines a light on the ineptitude of the thought process of the so-called black man and woman here in America, and how much you lean on the so-called white man for succor.
In order to have a flag, they chose to rebel against a monarchy in order to stop being subjects of that monarchy. So what you interpret as disrespect probably is the most patriotic thing happening today, in which kids are pushing back against the line.
Once again, grown men trying to exalt the actions of children. If you're trying to exalt the actions of children, what you're doing is you're extolling the thought process of the unlearned. So what are you really saying?
That everyone may enjoy the constitutional rights that that flag represents, and not just the empty nationalism of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
Powerful words from Killer Mike. And you.
Not quite, but I think that the brother has more potential to lead than Keisha Lance Bottoms does. That's for damn sure. But anyway, we'll see what happens. In these last days, a lot of brothers are going to be forced into positions where they're going to have to assume offices of preeminence and power so that our people can advance, especially as this place continues to fall, as is very obvious it is. But anyway, peace.